Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I was not planning on speaking this Shabbat, but I'm going to, in light of the events that happened yesterday from Israel in Lebanon. Because they're pretty fresh in my mind, they're not fully metabolized or digested, but I hope that you'll process it a little bit in your own mind. There are three things that I want to talk about. One is what happened. Two is who it is that was eliminated and how our response should be. And third, what is a Jewish response to this moment? Over the last 12 days, Israel has made it a primary function to restore normalcy in the north. For the last year, practically, people in the north have been forced refugees in their homeland. Some say 60, some say 80, depends on the time, it depends on the place. But close to 100,000 people have been displaced because of the war in the north that has nothing to do with Hamas, nothing to do with Palestinians, land, or sovereignty. It has to do with one very simple equation, and that is a people in the north, mainly run by Hezbollah, who don't want Jews as neighbors. It's not a fight over the Golan Heights. It's not a fight over the Strip or the Sinai Peninsula. It is a fight over having Jews as neighbors. And when they're done with that fight with Jews as neighbors, I promise you the fight will turn between Sunni and Shiite. So that's the first thing to understand. The second piece of that is that over time, from the beginning of October 7th, what happened on October 8th when Hezbollah involved itself in the fight of Hamas and aligned its forces as one of the three axes of evil that are proxies of Iran, the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah, the three H's. Rockets have flown from the north and forced people not to be able to live in their home. Now, I've gone to Israel 7 times since October 7th, and in each time I've stayed in a hotel, and in every hotel I've stayed in by design, I will only stay in hotels that have agreed to host people who are called mifunim, displaced people from either the north or the south envelope. And let me tell you that when you're a family with 2 or 3 little kids and you're living in one room in a hotel, the luster of hotel traveling is over in about 4 days. And to see kids who are having their breakfast meal amongst tourists and others in a hotel lobby and fighting with parents as they try to manage their life and deal with groceries and have none of the accoutrements of their home and the comforts of their home, it wreaks a sense of emotional trauma that will take decades for them to overcome. Decades. Is it a better alternative to them living in bomb shelters in the north? Absolutely. Are we proud of the hotels and all of the hospitality industry that did open up their rooms at no cost or a cost that was minimal to the government for these people? For sure. But it disrupted their lives. And it's time for them to go back home. Because don't forget, in the 70-plus year history of the state of Israel, Hezbollah has been successful in doing what no other group in history of Israel has done, and that is force people out of their homes for more than 10 days of time. Never in the history of the state of Israel has that happened. And I assure you, much like Yahya Sinwar is taking a victory lap for the atrocities of October 7th, so too were the leaders of Hezbollah celebrating that these people were displaced. So much so, that weeks ago, they had made it their declaration in response to Prime Minister Netanyahu's declaration that we will return our residents to the north, that they will do everything in their power so that residents don't feel safe or welcome in the north. In fact, they were planning an October 7th-like attack in the Galilee that would go in through the border, either through tunnels or above the tunnels, through water and other vehicles, and attack residents, terrorize, take captive, and kill and maim. Obviously, we cannot allow that to happen. The person who was taken out yesterday was as someone said this Shabbat, the head of the snake. He was the head of Hezbollah. So a little context. First of all, Hezbollah has been noted by every Western and morally based organization and country in the world as a terrorist entity. Everyone who is part of Hezbollah has their hands drenched in blood. And they had no qualms about bombing barracks with U.S. Marines in it in Lebanon, or French citizens or French army officials in Lebanon, and they have no qualms about killing people who are Jews or Zionists. And they feel the same way about Coptic Christians, which happen to make a very large percentage of the Lebanese population. Over the last 12 days, Israel has, I think, quite powerfully and successfully regained its sense of strength, intimidation, and deterrence in the region that was eliminated on October 7th and the days after. It said to all of the countries, those that seek to make peace with Israel, like Morocco, the Emirates, Bahrain, hopefully Saudi Arabia, and others, and those that see Israel as a sworn foe, don't mess with us. That while it might look that we are in the business of seeking peace, and it might look that we are computer nerds and geeks that are part of a startup nation, we will maintain a military dominance here that can rain down a terror and hell that you cannot even fathom. We lost that narrative on October 7th. And that envelope that was lost was taken advantage of by all of those who seek to do harm to Israel, and those who have made peace with Israel worried and trembled. Is this the same Israel that was? Yesterday reminded us, and also the last 12 days reminded us, we have reestablished that strength and that deterrence, and we must reestablish it. We can never be lax. We can never rest on our laurels again. We can never think, we'll just keep the enemy at bay and we can be fine. We learned a painful lesson and paid a horrible price for that strategic error. Over the last 12 days, Israel systematically, from the bottom layer to the very top of the cake, removed all of the Hezbollah leadership in a very precise, targeted manner. Whether it was the laser focus of establishing the beepers that exploded and maimed fighters. As I said to my wife, it's very hard to shoot a rocket when you don't have arms. It's very hard to fire a gun at your enemy when you can no longer see. And to take out 3,000 Hezbollah fighters with major injuries to their extremities through this act was something out of a James Bond film and worthy of celebration. It was brilliant. To target those who are in cahoots with the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and those who were part of the Hezbollah leadership over the last few days, and eliminate all of them by letting Nasrallah know we are leading up to you, and then a precision strike that removed Nasrallah, and who was left in the heads of his organization was also a military feat that will be celebrated. And it is something for us to indeed celebrate it. Hassan Nasrallah, who was 64 years old, has been the head of Hezbollah since 1991, when his predecessor was taken out by Israeli forces. In that time, he has been sworn to the destruction of the Zionist state, to Jews everywhere. And it is he alone who has commanded his forces to kill Jews at all fronts. It is he who insisted in the breach over the fence from Lebanon that abducted Eldad Regev and Ehud Goldwasser and killed others in the process. It is he that has fired thousands of rockets into Israel, and he that instructed thousands of weapons to come over from Iran through the channel of Syria. It is he who tortured Lebanese Christians and Sunnis. It is he who is responsible for the torture of Syrian refugees who aren't of his particular sect. This is not a man that I will shed a tear for, and I don't think you should either. But that leads us to point number 3, which is, what is the Jewish response to such a moment in time? For some, it's dancing. For some, it's celebrating. But not for me. In fact, I remember vividly when the news had trickled out that Osama bin Laden had indeed been taken out in Pakistan by an elite force of American Navy SEALs. A group had gathered in front of the White House at the time, and they were opening up beers and drinking and celebrating. Another group went down to the World Trade Center site, and they were dancing. And I thought that that was tasteless and terrible. Now, let me be abundantly clear. I didn't shed a tear for Osama bin Laden's death. And in fact, I hug tight and appreciate, literally, figuratively, not literally, the Navy SEAL 6 team that was responsible for his elimination. And the world is a better place without him in it. And were I in the non-coveted position of having to say, do we pull the trigger or not? No question we do, both for Nasrallah and both for Osama bin Laden. But I believe the Jewish response to a moment like this is different than a non-Jewish response. The Jewish response to a moment like this is to exhale. It is to feel a sense of temporary relief. It is incredible appreciation for all of our armed forces and a government that will do all that it can to protect its citizens at all costs. It is one that thanks God that the likes of Hassan Nasrallah are no longer in our midst. It's also one that asks God, how did the likes of Hassan Nasrallah and Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler and Eichmann and others for that matter come into being? I believe that in Judaism, we don't celebrate the required death of our enemies. We exhale. We take relief. We don't have to post all of the jokes that are possible on social media. We don't have to dance a jig. We don't have to make funny beeper memes. One time in Israel, I got to meet someone who I wasn't expecting to meet, and he was one of my heroes by extension. He came to the synagogue after we met and spoke, and he and I have maintained a friendship, and I'm proud to call him a dear and close confidant. His name is Amos Hausner, and he is famous by extension because his father, Gideon Hausner, was the attorney general who prosecuted the crime against Eichmann in the court in Israel. Now, this was a critical moment in 1962 because Eichmann had been captured by the Mossad in 1960, and his trial was not just a trial against Eichmann, it was really a trial against all of the likes of Eichmann and all of those connected to Wannsee and the Final Solution. It was a trial for all of the Jews who had survived and what would be the blending at that time between Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe and Sephardic Jews from the crescent of Africa and other places in Spain and Iraq and Iran and Syria who had made their way for Aliyah to Israel. And I asked Amos a question that had bothered me from my response that I had penned after the death of Osama bin Laden. His father was present when Eichmann was hung, and he said that there was not one account, after me asking him, not one, of dancing or celebrating after the hanging of Eichmann. The country was jubilant that he was caught. The country was relieved that he was brought to justice. But candies were not handed out. Parades were not given. There were no celebrations. In fact, the cabinet of the Knesset, when Ben-Gurion told the cabinet that Eichmann had landed in Israel, and he waited till they landed in Israel to share the news, the cabinet insisted on having a parade for the Mossad, who was responsible for his finding and capture and bringing him back to Israel. And Ben-Gurion was defiant, slapping the table, saying, absolutely not. The reward for the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. A quote from the Talmud that Ben-Gurion, of course, was incredibly aware of. Even if he wasn't a devout religious Jew, he was a knowledgeable one. What I also think that Ben-Gurion reminded us of in that moment, and we should be remembering at this moment, is that Israel, and I spoke about this a few weeks ago, lives in a balance between Munich and Entebbe, a balance between October 7th and September 28th, a balance between these two times of incredible victories and painful losses. Some of us will think in our mind's eye when we think of the Israeli Defense Forces as this elite unbreakable, miraculous hand of God group that is led by groups like the Yamam and the Shabak and the Shayetet that go in. They go into Gaza pretending to be Muslim Arabs, and they miraculously catch Noah Argamani and Andrei Kozlov and Almog Meir John, and they grab them into their arms, and they, under gunfire, put them into a helicopter, and they receive word from their headquarters, and they respond, the diamonds are in our hands. And Andrei Kozlov was in this building on Thursday night, and people will see that as a pure miracle. And that is one lens through which we see our army. And then there's another lens where those same groups make their way to a terror tunnel, but just a little bit too late, with perhaps a little bit too much warning, perhaps a little bit too much noise. And there they find the bodies of 6 hostages whose blood is still warm, executed and killed. Munich and Entebbe, October 7th, and the killing of 1,200 Jews ruthlessly and the capture of many more. And then the last 12 days that has eliminated all of the leadership of Hezbollah and set the clocks back on that organization decades. I was talking with Rabbi Cohen and Cantor Singer on our walk-in. It just so happened that all 3 of us converged at the same time at the front of the driveway to the temple. And I said, we are at a juxtaposition moment. In one moment, we can say that Iran, who unquestionably is the source of this cancer, Iran has invested probably $5 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars, towards their proxies in Yemen, Hezbollah, and Hamas. Meanwhile, there are kids who don't have a kernel of rice to eat in Yemen, but they have missiles to shoot. And in the course of the last 365 days, Israel has eliminated that investment, without question. All of the energies that Iran has done to prop up Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis has been eliminated by Israel. I think the Houthis, if they dare to send one more missile, will feel a wrath from Israel and perhaps even America that will be unparalleled. In fact, the last response by Israel charged such a response by the Houthis that they said, after they shot again stupidly and naively at Israel, please don't respond, we can't withstand another hit, which is ridiculous. But at the very same time, while Israel eliminated that investment from Iran, Iran sees a return on its investment through the acts of October 7th and all that came through it and the porosity of that moment through Israeli defenses and through the fact that close to 100,000 people weren't able to live in the north of Israel for almost a year. That depends on the lens through which you see it. Will Iran see that as a year of success, or will they see that as their last salvo in what was the ultimate destruction of their proxies? Obviously, you know which one all of us in this room and hopefully the civilized world are hoping for. But let us not dance a jig and rejoice. Let us exhale. Let us take relief that Hassan Nasrallah is no longer living in the same world as you and me and our cousins in our Holy Land. And the world's a better place without him in it. But don't let us celebrate. That's not our Jewish way. And it's not our Jewish way because we don't want that celebration or swagger to smack us in the face when we face our next Munich moment, when we go back into a tunnel and find hostages who are dead and warm. We can't afford that. We have lost the ability to swagger, and while we can flex our muscle and show our strength, I don't think this is a moment for us to strut. I close today with an important thought. Number one was from a meme that I saw that caused me to reflect that I think all of us need to think long and hard about. And the meme said that there are more people in Lebanon and Syria today celebrating the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah than at Columbia University. Think about that for 1 second. That's a problem that needs to be addressed in our midst, about people who have made it in vogue and appropriate to be so anti-Israel that they support terrorists in the process. It's a ship that is on the wrong path, and we have a responsibility. Just as Israel has a responsibility to take out Nasrallah, we have a responsibility to right that ship here in this country and in other countries. And I plan to be one at the front lines to do that. The second thing I want to do in closing is pause for a moment and give hoda'ah and bracha, to give thanks and blessing. Thanks to all of those leaders, which so many people are so quick to curse when they do something wrong, but clearly did something amazing and right in the last 12 days and have removed major threats to our shared world. For their wisdom, for their brilliance, for their deftness, for their steady hand. And most importantly, I take this moment with all of you to pray to God, that God continue to protect them and every member of the Israeli Defense Forces, every member who cares about the state of Israel, all of its inhabitants, that they should live in peace, and that this new year will be the dawning of hope, of possibility, and blessings. Amen.